Going to be talking about renewable energy siting. Like Jolene said, I'm the new program manager for CEDI, and it's my contact information there. The program basically is I work with local government entities, energy providers, landowners, and any other stakeholders that are responsible for development of renewable energy ordinances and regulations. One of the first things I want to talk about here is I attended a presentation by Sarah Mills. She works out of the University of Michigan. She's director of the Graham Sustainability Institute. She's a social scientist, and she and her group had done some research in people who oppose utility scale renewable energy. And she had some really interesting points I was going to share. Their research on this found that it is not, she said is, she said it's not NIMBYism. I don't necessarily agree with this because I've found in a lot of counties there does seem to be that in that people might be supportive of it, but they're not supportive of it near their home or near their location. One of the big concerns by people are community benefits. She said that the opponents usually are focused on local impacts. Global impacts aren't not existent or distant. So as an example, people don't want to hear about global warming, or they don't want to hear about how it affects birds in general, but they want to know how it's going to affect birds in their county. They're looking at local. Another problem is they rarely see the tax benefits. Even though they're there, they don't see them. I use an example of here in Howard County. The county's done a nice job of communicating or showing all the projects that are funded from wind turbines. Conversely, I know from when I was in Tama County, you talk to the opponents and they will say, their comment I hear a lot from them is there's nothing to be shown from these tax benefits. We haven't seen any benefits. So if there are benefits, people need to see them. It needs to be communicated. There's also a concern about quality of life and landscape aesthetics. A lot of times people just don't like the view of solar panels, or they don't like the view of wind turbines. And again, that's very subjective. I mean, some people don't like radio towers. Some people don't like metal roofs on houses. So it's kind of subjective, but it's out there. Another thing with opponents is shared ownership. A comment I see a lot in what the research has shown, perception is that developers and the landowners benefit, but the community doesn't benefit as a whole. So they see a limited number of people that are winners and the majority of people are losers. Another concern from opponents is process fairness. They feel like the government ignores their wishes. I'm seeing a little bit of this in Cerro Gordo County. They recently had a solar and wind ban by the county government, and the developer is still proceeding through the Iowa Utility Commission for development of this large solar farm. So people get upset about that, where they just don't feel it's fair. And another thing is people are critical of the energy developers not engaging the public. A lot of times they'll strong arm landowners or have them sign non-disclosure agreements. A lot of times in the early stages, they're very secretive. They don't communicate well. I've seen this. Another prime example is Cerro Gordo County. at least in the supervisor's opinion, the energy company has not been very good about communicating or sharing information. So that was another criticism. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to opposition to energy renewal projects. Here in Iowa, there's several groups that are organized against renewables. I have some examples. One that's active in Clinton County is the Don Quixote Society. In Tama County, we have the Tama County Against Turbines, TCAT. In Henry County, they have the Henry County Watchmen, and they now are active in Des Moines County. And I'm sure Kenny Olison can attest to that, because one of their people spoke here recently at a hearing. And then Dickinson County Concerned Citizens, I just recently dealt with that group at a public hearing in Dickinson County. But all of these groups, the one thing they have in common is they're well-funded. They often are actually incorporated. They seem to have a lot of money for mass mailings. Dickinson County in particular, they sent out these really nice color mailings out to all county residents. They also seem to have money for media with newspaper ads and so forth. They also will pay and bring in, quote, expert witnesses that will testify as a healthcare provider or scientist. But they typically will give kind of fringe testimony or give testimony with facts that really aren't supported by common studies. They also tend to have closed or private Facebook groups for sharing information. And these groups will coordinate with each other. I found that all these organizations tend to be sharing the same information with each other. And they can be quite aggressive with their tactics. There's been several counties where they will actually go to landowners' homes, knock on door, and tell them why they shouldn't be signing the agreement and so forth. And the photo that's in this picture is from Cedar County. And that's just one of the examples. Is almost every county I've been to, the opponents will bring up this photo. And this, unfortunately, is one of the worst case scenarios in Cedar County, where you had a wind developer that was not very responsive to the needs of the landowner, ended up using explosives to blow up the tower to fall down. There's extensive damage, debris everywhere, and it's just kind of a nightmare scenario. But unfortunately, we have over 6,000 wind turbines in Iowa, and we had this one incident, but this one case is getting brought up by opponents in all sorts of counties. So I'll move on here, talking about successful campaign and managing. That's something our local energy districts can do to try to drum up support and provide better messaging or so forth. And this is based on a book called Contagious by Jonah Berger. It focuses on why certain ideas or products are more successful or spread or have more of a viral type content. And I think this information is really good for when energy districts are trying to get support for renewable energy. He talked about there's 6 ingredients for successful messaging for it to be spread more. And those are social currency, triggers, emotions, public, practical value, and stories. And we'll talk about all of these. You don't need all of these, but the more of these you have in your messaging, the more likely it will become viral and people will share this information. The first one is social currency. Research has shown that people naturally want to look smart, successful, or cool. Social currency is more valuable than actual money. And in order to have social currency, the information you share or the messaging you share, it needs to be something remarkable, something surprising. It also helps if you make people feel like an insider as far as knowing something that maybe other people don't know. Triggers. The second thing you want is triggers, basically top of mind, tip of tongue. I have a picture there of Folgers. For those of us old enough to remember the Folgers commercial, they tied getting up in the morning with a cup of coffee. And so, your product or idea should have a trigger, should be frequent, common, strongly linked. It might be somehow tying your message. Example would be, for us, would be, when you associate turning on a light. in your house. You know, it needs to be strongly linked. Also, contacts is important. It needs to be in the right situation, location. And you can grow habitat by creating new links. So, you know, trying to find your message or product in one situation, but also link it to multiple situations so people can think about your message frequently. This is an important one I found that works for our opponents. Emotions. So high arousal feelings are shared more than low arousal feelings. So, and also physically induced arousal will cause people to share as well. A good example of that is like 5K runs for charities or polar plunges. When you get your body in a physically agitated state, you're more likely to spread the messaging. And so high arousal emotions drive people to action. And like I said, I've seen this work for the favor for opponents. And examples of high arousal, it can either be positive or negative. Negative is kind of what our opponents use as a cudgel, and that includes anger, anxiety, and fear. And with renewables, people use this very well against renewables with all these worst case scenarios or horror stories. But on our side, you know, you can use positive messaging like awe, excitement, or amusement. So either positive or negative, a high arousal emotion will be more likely to share messaging, where a low arousal will be less likely to share. And that could be positive, just be contentment, and negative like sadness. Public messaging is more likely to share if the public can see it. And, you know, behaviors, public, thoughts are private. It's monkey see, monkey do. Observability has a huge impact. So if people can see it, and, you know, it could be what's called behavioral residue, like a physical trace or remnant of behavior. Example of that is the Livestrong wristbands. You know, other things can be things you actually do as an organization. You know, when you're actually, you know, setting up solar panels at a business or a church or whatever. Also with this, you should highlight what people are doing and should do. People don't respond well when you talked about what you shouldn't do. Examples of that are like the Nancy Reagan with her Say No to Drugs campaign. That was just kind of a failure. So you should always talk about what people should do for actions and not what they shouldn't do. Practical value. People like to pass on practical, useful information. You shouldn't overwhelm people with details overwhelming. So that's important with messaging on renewable energy is, you know, keep it short and concise. Don't go down the rabbit hole with all sorts of information or support like that. And lastly, stories. People really like stories. People don't think in terms of information. They think in terms of narratives. The important thing is if you have a powerful story, the information will come along with the ride. So, you know, the story needs to relate to your messaging or your product, and it helps a lot if the story is funny, surprising, or entertaining. Moving on now, as far as energy districts working on siting issues, I have a list of potential partners and resources that I've been using, and the first is farmers and farm organizations, especially with these large scale utility projects. They're going to involve farmers. And so one organization that we've had success here in Howard County, and I know it's not every county, but Howard County has been Farm Bureau. They've worked with us as partners with wind energy projects and energy efficiency upgrades. There's other organizations. There's an organization called the American Solar Grazing Association. That's a great outfit. They work with both training farmers to be solar grazers and with energy developers to design facilities for solar grazing, and it's primarily with sheep. There's a new organization that is not public yet. It's coming out. We do have a farmer here that's on the board of directors. It's a national group, and it's the Renewable Energy Farmers of America. And that will be, like I said, a national group. They should be coming out public here this summer. Then also environmental groups, examples at Iowa Environmental Council, the Center for Rural Affairs. They both have excellent guidelines for utility scale renewable energy. National Wildlife Federation also is supportive of renewable energy. They do have a lot of good facts as far as relation of how utility scale renewables can affect wildlife. Also, a good partner is the energy companies and cooperatives like Mid-American, Alliant. The RECs can be a good partner. Also, energy developers. examples like Ranger Power, Indra Energy, Nextera. The one criticism I have, I guess, with the renewable energy developers is it seems like they kind of reach out to organizations like ours kind of late in the game, almost like in a transactional way. They don't, I guess they don't look at us as a partner, but when the, you know, crunch time arrives trying to get a project approved, then they're on the, you know, phone line asking for help, or they're emailing asking for help. So, you know, one thing I wish they did a better job of was looking at organizations like ours as a partner. Another group is Clean Grid Alliance. That's a nonprofit funded by renewable energy companies. And then also economic organizations too can be a powerful partner. And I'm going to go off a screen share if I can figure it out. This is my first time I've done this. All right.
Great. Hey, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and I just want to follow talking with partners. One thing I've seen too is, especially with these projects, is for you to get to know your county supervisors. You know, it shocks me sometimes how people don't know who their county supervisors are, what they look like. So it's good to get a relationship with them even before a project arrives. You know, just get a good, you know, working relationship with them, and don't be calling them or emailing them right when a controversial project arrives. It's nice to kind of do the groundwork ahead of time. So I will shut up now and let people ask questions.
I would thank you so much, Paul. That's good information, and I'm sure there's gonna be a few questions here. I'm gonna start with just a couple of asks. One, if you wouldn't mind and you're comfortable going off or coming onto video, so that I want to take a screenshot. I have an ulterior motive here, but I'd like to get a bunch of us in a screenshot for growing the energy district movement. So just sort of showing what an after-hour session looks like, if you don't mind. So when you're ready and can go on, if that would be great. And thank you, everybody. And let's see, the next thing that I was going to say, or I was going to ask is, Paul, would you mind just kind of, if you haven't already, just a couple of the places that you listed some of the the opposition groups in various counties, but just a little bit of maybe just one or two stories of going out and maybe down in Tama. I see Kent's here, and I know Kenny's on. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of just a couple of like how it started, where they are now, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I can, there's been a wide range of situations, and I would say that probably Kent and Tama County is probably in one of the worst situations.
Oh, darn.
Well, Tama County is an interesting story. So a few years back, Tama County had a board of supervisors, a 3-member board of supervisors, and they had previously approved a small wind farm. I think it was roughly about 20-25 wind turbines in Tama County. So they approved that. And back when I was talking about how people don't see tax benefits, what happened with Tama County is the supervisors TIF'd the wind turbines. So that's tax or incremental financing. So what that does is it allows a county to issue bonds for infrastructure, and then those bonds are paid off with the increased tax assessment of the wind turbines. So Tama County, what they had done is they used the TIF money to add more rock to the gravel roads. And I don't know if it was mismanaged, what happened, but a lot of people were upset because they're like, we're supposed to get all this tax money, there's nothing to show for it. So anyway, so they had this 3-member board, they had that wind farm, then a new wind farm was proposed for Tama County. And what happened is there got to be a anti-turbine group that formed, this TCAT, that was very vocal, and they attempted to stop this wind farm, and the 3 board member had already approved it, but then they put it up for vote to go from a 3-member board to a 5-member board, which meant all the previous 3 guys had to rerun to get a seat. And what happened was the new 5-member board of supervisors, 4 of the 5 are TCAT members now. So you have a 5-member board of supervisors where 4 of the 5 are TCATs and rabidly anti-turbine. And unfortunately, even though the wind turbine project was approved by the prior board, they have put a moratorium on it in Tama County. And it's to the point now where it's Salt Creek Wind is the name of the wind farm. They now are suing Tama County because Tama County has not lifted that moratorium, even though they had approval by the prior board. And so that's an unfortunate situation that you have sitting on the board of supervisors, 4 out of 5 people that ran or are rabidly anti-renewable. And this not only went from wind, but it's trickled down to solar. Because I was down there with Kent with a planning and zoning meeting because they're rewriting their solar ordinance. And basically it's the ordinance that they're doing is terrible. It's totally unworkable. They might as well have a ban on solar too, the way it is, because they're putting so many requirements on it. So I guess that's a long story about Tama County. That's probably the worst case scenario I've seen with renewables.
And so in that particular, in Tama, just to get that straight, and for people that are maybe even a little new to the issue, and where SETI kind of, the Clean Energy District Network sort of comes in, and that in Tama's case, they have 2 separate utility scale renewable energy siting ordinances that'll be on the books. One that applies to larger scale solar and one that applies to wind farms. Is that correct?
Well, they haven't even started rewriting the wind turbines yet. So
okay,
as of right now, it's still a moratorium on the wind and a moratorium on solar, but they are in the final stages with planning and zoning of rewriting that. But to me, it's kind of funny. They might as well just ban solar because they're going through a lot of effort and a lot of writing all the stipulations criteria for what you need to meet to make a large solar project. Well, in essence, it's a ban because they're using CSR as the criteria. That's for people aren't familiar with this, corn suitability rating. It's basically, it's a number from 0 to 100, with 100 being great ground. But if I remember correctly, with solar, I think anything above, I think 60 or 70, they can't have solar on. Well, it's in Iowa, it's very easy to be 70 or above. I mean, and unfortunately, when the CSR is lower than that, usually it means it's by a river or a creek or a wetland area that wouldn't be suitable for solar anyway. So
does anybody have any follow-up questions to that situation, particularly?
Just a point about Tama County. Traditionally, Tama County has been #1 in the number of cow-calf operations and a lot of pasture. So that might lend itself well for the Solar Grazing Association, because in theory, it would allow grazing in Tama County under solar. And I don't know if that ever came up, especially if 4 of the 5 board members are anti-solar. But in theory, that could be a win-win for cow-calf producers.
Yeah, the only, I brought that up at the planning and zoning, but the problem is the way they're writing the ordinance. They have a maximum panel height, and if you raise the panel high enough for cattle, it would violate their code. You know what I'm saying?
Why do they have a maximum panel height?
Panel height? Because of aesthetics. They don't want the panels too high. So it's a 15-foot max. And so when I brought that up about grazing, they shouted at me, well, it can't be raised high enough because we have a 15-foot max. So it's like, okay, so you just eliminated that. So
well, I appreciate when they're honest about what it is. When they say we don't want it because we don't want to see it. I used to farm, and just in comparison, my next neighbor's dryer was really loud. I hear opposition to example based on
Hey, Steve, I think you're coming across kind of garbled right now.
So
do I need to slow down?
You might need to cut your video. Yeah. I got my photos, everybody, if you want to go off video too. So yeah. Thank you.
The point I was trying to make is that I feel like they're cherry picking.
Oh,
that
I agree.
They're saying we don't want solar panels 16 feet high because we don't want to see them. We have 100 high. We have 100 feet high. We have other things in farm areas that are way higher than solar panels. So again, I feel that like it's things, and
yeah,
I do appreciate about saying we don't want to see. At least then you know what the opposition is. But really, it's inconsistent.
Yeah, and that's one of those things is I work with and communicate with the Center for Rural Affairs because they've been real active with counties, with ordinances and so forth. And, Todd Bowman, he told me that, he's always told me you can only do so much. He goes, if counties want to write bad ordinances, they're going to write bad ordinances. And unfortunately, I've seen some counties do it. But not to rain on Kent's parade there in Tama County, but I think Tama County is perhaps one of the most difficult counties I've seen as far as opposition or resistance at the board of supervisors level or planning and zoning level. It's bad.
So, but your whole talk and your purpose of your program is to rally support for this and to generate enthusiasm and positive spin. So what has worked so far, if anything? And using the tools that you had suggested.
Well, I'm gonna fast forward to a success story, I'll say. Okay. So I just was in Mitchell County the other day. Mitchell County, Iowa is just the one county west of us. And they are rewriting their wind ordinances. The planning and zoning came up with their amendments to the existing wind ordinance. And anyway, they're moving forward. There'll be a public hearing. But I'll say that was a success story because the landowners have communicated well with the supervisors. The wind energy developer, which is NextEra, has done a very good job of communicating with the board of supervisors. And the board of supervisors have seen the financial benefits of wind in Mitchell County. Because Mitchell County is very similar to where I'm at, Howard County. They have roughly, I think, around 140, 150 turbines currently. And they've seen a lot of the financial benefits that Howard County has seen as far as providing money for infrastructure, also for lowering school tax levies. Riceville Community School, which includes part of Howard County and part of Mitchell County, and they have a lot of turbines in their district. Because of the increased tax base, Riceville Community Schools has the third lowest tax levy in the state of Iowa, and their student population is growing. So people aren't moving away from these turbines. That's one thing people worry about quality of life. People obviously aren't moving away from the turbines because the school population is growing for there. So, Mitchell County is a success story. Another success story is I was over in Dickinson County. They had a 3-day public hearing with their planning and zoning on approval of a wind farm there. And despite there being a vocal, passionate group opposition, they ended up approving the project. And again, it was because the landowners did a good job of speaking up about the project, and the actual planning and zoning committee members, I think, did a good job of looking at the facts and not being swayed at the emotion. So I know this is probably not an answer people are going to like, but I think the board members on planning and zoning or the board of supervisors dictate whether or not you're going to be successful, because obviously they were more open-minded looking at facts and so forth, and so they approved that sort of project. So getting back to you, Jolene, as far as techniques or messaging, I guess I'm going to throw that out to the group. I talked about some of the points to make a successful campaign, and I'd be interested to hear about people's ideas how to incorporate those 6 items to make it a powerful campaign, or a campaign that's going to have messaging that's shared.
Well, I like that. The toss back. I like the idea of, the idea that there's an angry, it's probably, in many cases, it could very well be an angry, loud minority that's kind of putting themselves out there and waving their flags against these kinds of projects. And I wonder if things like locally led focus groups to really bring some data to these groups, in many cases, sometimes moratoriums are not a bad thing, because it gives groups time to organize and to study and to really collect that information on true public sentiment. For example, school districts that are having, inclining enrollment as opposed to declining enrollment, it might be hard to just completely say that's why. But it also is information that is good for the case. And then I like what Mark has here. He says, I testified before the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors about a large solar field proposal. I started off by saying that all fields in Iowa are solar fields. It's just a matter of how sun rays are collected and utilized. And solar fields don't have chemical runoff, erosion, and help small farmers stay on their farms with a dependable annual income. Is there something published on each county's tax benefits?
I'm not aware of a resource as far as how renewables would affect each county directly. I know that when I worked with Center for Rural Affairs here in Howard County, we got that information from the auditor. And the Clean Grid Alliance, they did a study on Mitchell County, and I know, again, they asked the auditor. So I guess for those of you in different counties, the best resource would be talk to the auditor. They would be able to tell you what sort of revenue is getting generated from renewable projects. I know the auditor here in Howard County was awesome as far as getting that information and also educating me about TIF funds, because I really wasn't that familiar with TIF as a finance instrument. And I do know with the public, there's a little misunderstanding about how TIF works. And so that's important too, as far as education.
Yeah, right. That's a confusing topic. We need a flow chart on that, because that as soon as you start talking about it to just a regular person, they may not listen to all the words. So
yeah, I usually, the simplest explanation I can of, if you got a piece of farm ground and you put a wind turbine on it, basically that little patch, that 1 acre patch or whatever where the turbine's on, that gets rezoned or reassessed as a commercial property. And then basically that increased value has an increased tax increment. So that extra money that is collected by the county then can either go into the general fund, or it can be designated as what's called a TIF district. So this whole TIF thing started originally in California with urban blight areas. So what TIF allows governments to do is designated a TIF district. And so then that money, rather than going into the general fund, it goes toward payment of a bond. So then a company like Howard County, I shouldn't say a county. So like Howard County, we were in terrible need of bridge repair. And so what the county has done is they create TIF districts, and then they use the tax money from the wind turbines to pay off bonds that were used to pay for these bridges. So a lot of people have like, well, you're going into debt with TIF. Well, you're not going into debt. It's just that extra money you're collecting rather than going into the general fund and consequently being restricted by the state in the general fund. It can go toward payment of bond for infrastructure.
yeah,
And so,
directed. Yeah.
yeah, so Howard County has used that for bridge replacement, county road paving projects, and also county equipment. Just to move on, I did see that Cheryl Miller had a question about more
Farm
information
Bureau.
about working with Farm Bureau. I guess I would just recommend reaching out to your local Farm Bureau group. I have a great relationship with the president of Farm Bureau here. Just find out who the president is, call them up, see if you can attend, because the counties have a monthly meeting. Attend a meeting, introduce yourself, kind of talk about what CEDI is all about. And we've had a lot of success with the local Farm Bureau here, particularly with wind and energy efficiency upgrades, REAP. I will have to go on record, though, that with our local Farm Bureau, they have let me know that they would be opposed to any large-scale utility solar project. They're fine with smaller ones. We have like a small 5 megawatt facility outside of Cresco. So that's roughly 30 acres. And they're fine with something like that. And that one does get grazed, by the way, by sheep. They're fine with the smaller size projects, but they do have concerns like with some of these 1,200 acre or 2,000 acre projects. So, there would be limits to how much you can partner with them, but they can be a very powerful partner.
Okay, and they can be, and it's just, basically sometimes partners are not friendly, and sometimes they are, and it's just case by case. I wonder, Abby has a question, and then Kent has a question, and then Kenny has his hand up. So I'll just ask Abby's. She's just basically asking about having non-residents make comments in county board of supervisor or zoning. Are people that are non-resident welcome to go make comments if they're not in the county?
Yeah, well, yeah, and there's people who aren't residents of the county on both sides that are making comments or testifying. Again, getting back to Des Moines County, there's a gal from Henry County. She's a member of the Watchmen, which is the anti-renewable crowd, she actually went to the public hearing, and 14 residents in Henry County, they ceded their 3 minutes each to her. So she had like, I don't know what she ended up speaking for, but she had over, 40 minutes to speak, and she wasn't even a resident. And she was
yeah.
opposition group. But on the flip side, I've gone to public hearings and I've spoken, as a representative of CEDI, but I've even, been to counties that aren't members of ours. And I was in Dickinson County and Mitchell County, and neither one are members, but there are projects there. And so I'd go there. So I wouldn't let being a non-resident stop you from that. It's the same way right now. The Iowa Utility Commission is open for public comments on the solar project in Cerro Gordo County. And there are many people posting against it that aren't even residents of Cerro Gordo. So I wouldn't let that stop you, because the opposition is doing it too. So
Yeah, I think it's just anchor where you come from, and what badge you're wearing, and the good thing is the Clean Energy District network is gaining in reputation, and so our platform is larger than it used to be, and so sometimes walking in and recognizing where you're coming from and what your background is. But certainly, Paul is the program manager on this program, and but it's not he's not the only guy. He can use team members, so I'm sure that allies, and certainly wherever there are energy districts already in existence, and if there's a fight to be had or a campaign to wage, Paul will work with you locally, because it's local. Let's see. So Kent had a question. I'm not sure which one came first, Kenny or Kent. But Kent is posing the question of, would smaller community-owned solar farms be a better way to introduce the benefits of solar and battery storage?
yes, definitely. I know when I was down in Tama County and I talked to a couple of the planning and zoning members afterwards, and even some of the opponents to the large scale solar, when I was discussing community solar, they seem to be open to that. And I think that ties back to the research from the University of Michigan on opponents. I think people are okay with smaller scale projects like that because they see the benefit locally, because community solar especially is locally, or even a smaller scale utility owned project like the one we have outside of Cresco. It's a 5 megawatt farm. That size still will go plug directly into the grid. And so people see that energy is going directly into their grid. They're benefiting. So I think people are supportive of like community scale solar or small utility scale solar, like under 5 megawatt. And also I think people are more open to the small projects from the aesthetics viewpoint. And I totally get it, because when I was in Tama County, I ended up sitting next to this couple that was opposed to the large solar project in Tama County. And they're a lovely couple. I had a great talk with them and everything, but they were opposed to it because they were going to be surrounded on 3 sides by over 1,200 acres of solar panels, and I get it. I get it that to some people that site can be jarring, almost dystopian, nothing but panels. So I get that. And so I think people from aesthetics standpoint, having 30 acres in solar panel isn't quite as jarring or traumatic as like a 1,200 or a 2,000 acre solar farm. So yeah, I think smaller projects would be more successful. And not only in Tama County, but when I was in Cerro Gordo with the public hearing for the solar farm there, I talked with the supervisors afterwards, and 2 of the 3 county supervisors, when I talked about community solar or possibility of solar grazing, they seemed open to that. So yeah, I think a smaller scale solar would be a good way to get the foot in the door. I also think incorporating grazing with solar is a good way to get a foot in the door, because a lot of counties are using the farm ground excuse or the CSR as a cudgel against these solar farms. And so I think any way we can incorporate agriculture with solar production, people will be more open to it.
Yeah, and sort of dispelling some of those myths. And that would be great for this program to have like consolidated or resources on the ready so that we're not all kind of like scrambling around that, this is a myth, this is not quite the case, and this is successful. Kenny, you've been waiting a long time. What's your question?
I just wanted to provide some perspective from Des Moines County.
Yeah.
our county supervisors are looking to change our ordinance. And it kind of came out of nowhere, right? Like they put our ordinance in place last year, they had meetings on it, nobody came, nobody said anything, so they passed it. Well, now we have farms that are getting contracts for solar, and all of a sudden, it's a big deal for some of these groups. So a couple of comments. There's a lot of misinformation that's based on somewhat of truth. So if this comes up in your county, the first thing I recommend to do is contact Paul. He's been an incredible wealth of information. He's given me everything I need to go to bat, because in Des Moines County, it happened the same way that it did in the other one that you were talking about. We had a gal come in, she got 46 minutes of time, and I got 6. But fortunately, I got to speak right after her and was able to just address point by point everything that she said. So we do have a lot of information already at hand. 2 things that I would like to ask, though. Around Des Moines County right now, there are signs in yards everywhere, no to wind power in Des Moines County. Do we have any resources for getting something like that? Because I've had a bunch of people approach me like, I want a yes sign in my yard.
Actually,
I'm like,
actually, Kenny, we do. This kind of makes me laugh because Andy Johnson, this is one thing he wanted to be done, and we have money budgeted for yard signs. But we just had a meeting here the other week, and I was just telling them that the different counties I've been to, there hasn't been a lot of eagerness for signs. And part of that was because the people that are for projects, unfortunately, are fearful or apprehensive about the anti-sentiment, so they don't want signs. And when I talked to Andy about it, he's kind of disappointed. He's like, oh, I still would love to have a county where we do that. But anyway, to answer your question, Kenny, yes, we have money allotted for yard signs. If you want to work with me on a design or clever slogan or whatever, that'd be awesome. And you would make Andy's day, because up until now, I haven't had anybody talk about signs for a project, so yes,
right.
The world is your oyster, Kenny.
So then I have one other question for a resource. And I know that as far as manufacturers and then developers and installers of these large scale systems, you're going to have your cream of the crop, and then you're going to have shit shows, for lack of better words, like they had in Mitchell County. Do we have a list of developers worked with that we know are good, that if they're going into a county, we can say, we know that they've worked on other projects and done a good job? And to contrast that, we've seen these developers out there before, and we would not recommend them, because that's another thing that's in play. You're going to have your Lexus, and you're going to have your Hyundai, and you're going to have everything in between. So getting a good developer in there, I think, is vital.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in there, but I think one thing that SETI has to be very careful of is getting ourselves into the accreditation business. So we can tell stories, but we can't really do commercials for one developer versus another, but we can certainly share stories. But we try to shy away from being involved in accreditation and validating one developer over another. But sorry, Paul.
Oh, I was just going to clarify, Kenny, the disaster was actually in Cedar County. That church was, and that was just a horrible situation. And again, that was because of a bad energy developer, unfortunately. And I'm not aware of them having any projects. That's actually a fairly old project, I guess, and it doesn't sound like they have much for other projects in Iowa, thank goodness. But getting back to your, not necessarily an endorsement, but I do agree. I think it's a good idea, and I'll do that as far as getting a list of energy developers. Because one of my criticisms, like I said before, is the energy developers, unfortunately, haven't viewed us as a resource or a partner. A lot of times, I feel like we're kind of used, so to speak, when it comes time to get a project across the finish line. They're emailing me or calling me up or like, hey, we really need some help here and stuff. And it's like, well, it would have been nice to be involved with the process early on. Because with Ranger Power in Cerro Gordo, it sounds like there's been some terrible missteps by the company, not fully engaging with the board of supervisors early on. And again, I want to go back to with just energy district members too, get a relationship with your supervisors. Because they're going to be the ones right now, because it's local control with renewable projects. And so eventually, if there's a problem, they're going to deal with it. And it's better if they know your organization before things get difficult.
I'm gonna second that, just based on our experience here. And I feel that our county supervisors aren't ideologically set on one side or the other. They just want information to make good decisions. And so that's where we come in. And again, I'm going to say, if anything comes up in your county, please reach out to Paul, because he's got the list of your standard bullet points that will counter every argument, whether it has merit or it's just hogwash, for lack of better words. But yes, get in touch with your county supervisors, let them know who they are, because truly they don't know anything about wind for the most part, I would assume, but they want to learn. And if all of their hearing is from the opposition, then that's how they're going to make their decision. So thanks again.
Yeah.
For your help.
There's a
Yeah.
couple of things that, Paul, I'm sure you've been all over this, but the SETI member drive, so our shared drive for SETI members, there's a folder that's called fact sheets. And in the fact sheets folder, there's another subfolder. One is called utility scale solar. And I know there's another one in there regarding right of first refusal and other things like that, federal solar tax credits, bunch of fact sheets in there. Good source, but the Lynn County handbook is a really good story on how they adopted some very decent and their process actually that they went through to get some compromised ordinance in place. And so looking at that, and I know that the Lynn County Energy District was a big part of working with their group, with those groups down there in their Planning and Zoning Commission. And the other thing that I was going to say just went out of my head. Oh, there are some more model ordinances in there that come from CFR, Center for Rural Affairs. So those are in there and can be places to start, at least for facts. So most of you should have access to that shared drive. And maybe Paul will want to curate that a little further, but I know that was prior to Paul's position. That's where we were kind of holding the reservoir of those fact sheets.
Yeah, and again, getting back to the supervisors, kind of nice. I was able to meet with the supervisors here in Mitchell County, and they actually have requested that I attend all of their public hearings coming up with wind, mainly to help balance against the opponents with misinformation. Because I introduced myself, described our organization, and I said we can be a great resource. And they're like, well, how exactly can you help us? And I said there's a lot of misinformation out there with both wind and solar, and I said I can help give unbiased facts, because I said I'm not an energy developer, I don't make $1 from that, and so again, I think by introducing yourself early to supervisors and showing them that you can be a partner or a reliable resource, and they're more likely to utilize you, believe you, so forth. So
For sure. All right. Well, we are at 6 o'clock. So I think we'll call it. Thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it. And I hope this was beneficial to you. Paul, can't thank you enough for putting a good program together and fielding some questions on an emerging program that's really important in the state of Iowa, at least right now. So
thank you. And Kenny, get in touch with me about the sign program. You're going to make Andy's day.
All right. See you guys. Bye-bye.